The annual wreath tossing ceremony held on Wickham's Quay is shaping up to become a very popular event on the calendar of events to mark Black History Month. Sean Rose tells us more about the fourth anniversary since the event was first held in 2009.
Redemption songs, dances, drumming, poetry, and inspirational speeches echoed the ancestral heritage of the African civilization at home and abroad during the fourth annual wreath tossing ceremony held on Wickham's Quay on Sunday, February 3rd. The activity coincides with the start of Black History Month and is seen as a vehicle for helping persons of African descent appreciate their past history and culture. The annual wreath tossing ceremony is organized by members of the African Studies Group. However, it was spearheaded by Gil Trott in 2009 as he sought to stimulate awareness about the millions of Africans who lost their lives during the transatlantic slave trade. Trott lamented the absence of an institutionalized transference of knowledge about the historical culture of the African civilization in primary and secondary educational institutions here in the BVI and throughout the Caribbean.
The educational systems of the West, the entire West, United States, Caribbean, everywhere. You learn about everyone else except yourself. I don't think it's fair to our children, our youngsters.
Director of Culture Luz Hodge Smith spoke of the many atrocities endured by the enslaved people brought from the African continent to the Western Hemisphere by the Europeans during the colonial era, which ran from the early 1600s until emancipation in 1838 in British colonies.
And just the hard life that they lived. I think the worst slaves that, if I recall, were the ones at Mount Healthy here in the Virgin Islands. They went through such hardship. They were starved out. They weren't fed. That's what I recall from my studies with the Virgin Islands Studies program. And today, I know, as I said, we're remembering those that died in transit, but we also have to remember those who suffered on land.
Cultural activist and educator Sawande Uhuru chaired the proceedings, and he had a cordial reminder for the people of African descent.
Our ancestral home is in Africa. Of course, we have some mixture, and we acknowledge that, of course.
Pastor Elroy Liebert of Mount Carmel Baptist Church warned not to let history repeat itself.
There are some things that we need to forget. And there are some things that we better don't forget. And one of them is what our ancestors been through. However, in remembering it, I pray that we would not enslave ourselves. Because I was reading today Genesis chapter 45. And when Joseph was sold into slavery and all of the difficulties that he'd been through, I remembered our ancestors. And Joseph said to his brethren, "Don't worry. God sent me before you to preserve life."
Opposition member in the House of Assembly and 1st District Representative Honorable Andrew Foy also addressed the ceremony, and he too echoed the importance of knowing one's history.
And when you hear we say we have to get back to Africa, a lot of times people get frightened when they hear the African Studies Club and people say that. And sometimes they ask me why they're saying that or what they mean. It's very simple. They don't mean physically. You or anybody don't mean physically to go back to Africa. There are people who actually believe that is a physical movement. No, it isn't that. You got to go back to the principles and the values of your ancestor that brought you here. The ideologies, their philosophies, their beliefs, caring for each other, loving each other, that brought you here. And once you understand that, then you have a sound foundation.
Pastor Melvin Turnbull also addressed the ceremony and pointed to legacies of a colonial past evident in the socio-economic realities of the African diaspora, especially in the Western Hemisphere. He said too many people are still afraid to embrace their African heritage.
Most of our educators don't want to talk about our history. A lot of people are ashamed. And whenever we talk about our history, we want to start with slavery. That's like whenever you talk about man, you want to talk about his fall. I call that snakeology. Because long before we were enslaved, and enslavement is something we need to understand. That's not who we are. That's what was done to us. We are kings and queens and princes and princesses. And one of the reasons we behave the way we do is because we don't know who we are.
Talk show host Cromwell Smith, otherwise called Eduenka, gave examples of post-traumatic slave syndromes and called for the behavior to be rooted out.
Why do we think our hair is bad? Why do we think our dark skin is bad? Why do we dislike our brothers of different shades? It is a result of post-traumatic slave syndrome. And our ancestors is requesting of us that finally, as a last hurdle for us to get over with all our success, that we go and dwell into that past, that plantation era, and study that what Bob Marley called that slave mentality that continues to have us from making the progress that we ought to be making and realizing our full potential as people of African descent.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome is a theory that explains the etiology of many of the adaptive survival behaviors in African communities throughout the diaspora. It is a condition that exists as a consequence of multi-generational oppression of Africans and their descendants resulting from centuries of chattel slavery. Sean Rose, JTV News.